what I sometimes tell people is that the most important election in American history was 1800. And you see where I'm
1800?
going.
Wow. Okay.
18
So
it,
Adams, Burr, and Jefferson. Is that what we're talking
Jefferson,
about?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Jefferson defeats John Adams. It is the replacement of the Federalist Party with what's called the Democratic Republican, which is now the Democratic Party. And yes, there was a little, let's say, elbow greasing and a little bit of tossing and turning. But guess what? At the end of the day, the losing party conceded the election and said, we lost fair and square, and we're going to try to beat you again in 4 years. And what that established in the United States was an important principle of democracy that the loser concedes, recognizes the legitimacy of the election, and says, we're going to hope to beat you the next time. What 216, or more importantly, I should say, what 220 was all about was a break in that tradition where Trump and his supporters basically denied the legitimacy of the election. We've never really had anything like that in American history.
Wow. In the past, you said we have had some um, sort of things similar, narratives similar to election denying in different sort of aspects, I guess. It's a matter of degree. I'm using your
Right.
words here. How did these carpings, these denials, or whatever, big lie, whatever you want to call them, how did they die out? Did Americans get tired of him?
I think a couple of things. One is I think America. I think some of the supporters or advocates of it essentially die out. They go away. They've usually been sort of fringe at the end of the day, and they've lacked a podium or a microphone to be able to sort of push their views. I think that's generally what's happened here. But what's made this different now, I'm going to say, is what? It's the social media. It's the capacity now to search out others and to be able to articulate your views and spread them across the country. But I also think that's what's different about this election is in 2020 was the fact that the denying came from where? The president of the United States. That is what's really unusual about it. Because usually
The
when we've
biggest
seen
bully
sort of
pulpit, right?
the biggest bully pulpit in the world. And when we've had it in the past where people have sort of said, I don't know if the election is fair or something like that, it was never given the degree of legitimacy that a sitting president of the United States would give it. And I think that's what take that along with the capacity of having a big microphone that is the social media,
Mm-hmm.
and also I'll have to say having a partisan press now to be able to advocate this. In the case we're talking about here, Fox News replicating that in their media accounts, social media replicating it, the president of the United States at that point, Donald Trump, making these statements. Put all that together, the elixir is for a level of election denying that, again, we just haven't seen in American history. But what I think is so characteristic about American politics in the age of Donald Trump has been sort of this consistent ability to really sort of spew out lies and get away with it. What was it? The Washington Post at one point charted out and said what 10,000 lies during the Trump presidency.
Dr. Schultz, I want to interrupt you and bring out a historical, really fact here. We talked about social media, right? And how it's empowered different factions in all aspects of life, not just politics. But we had that. I'm just going to use your example in the 1800 election. There were different newspapers that were entirely partisan, and they were sort of their social media and spewing just lies. I've read many books
Correct.
on this. So, is one difference between now, the 21st century, post social media, and let's say 1800, is just that now it's on steroids. Everyone can do it. Is that the difference?
I think steroids, but also at the end of the day, even though the partisan newspapers in 1800 said it, at the end of the day, John Adams conceded. John Adams did finally concede and say, I lost. I lost the election. Now, that's important. So combination of let's say the elites, let's say in this case, John Adams, the elite saying at the end of the day, I lost the election, But now take the fact that we have an elite here. Donald Trump didn't take that position, said, I lost, but it was cheating. Many other Republicans said they lost in cheating. And now take the media and put it on steroids, to use your phrase here. It becomes incredibly easy to circulate the big lie. Briefly here, there was a study that was done by MIT psychologists a few years ago that wanted to look at the social media and what travels further and deeper, truth or lies. And they found by studying Twitter that lies travel further and
Oh,
deeper and denser. And I think that's really sort of part of what's going on here. It's the ability of being able to circulate to more people more quickly, the ability to spew out a lie than we saw back then. I mean, I point out to my students, and it's not quite related here. When the storming of the Bastille took place in the 18th century, it took 6 weeks for people in the outer regions of France to realize that the French Revolution was going on.
oh,
Even
that
in
is so
1800,
interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
even in 1800, it took an incredible amount of time to circulate information. What are we looking at? Local newspapers. There's no telegraph, there's no telephone, there's no television, there's no radio. It was just hard to reach a lot of people with a story.
Let's go back to our bully pulpit discussion. Uh, how much is the person of Mr. Trump a factor? And let me qualify that. I'm talking about his life experiences in two different perspectives. One is his business upbringing was not in a big US corporation with sort of deeply entrenched and complex system where he had to follow the rules in
Right.
order to climb the ladder. He worked for his father and other corporations, but that were smaller corporations. And also, I note that until his presidency, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he served our country in any official capacity, right? I don't think he did. So how much are these two life experiences a factor in how Mr. Trump has dealt with the 2020 and now the 2022 midterm elections?
I think it has a lot to do with everything in the sense that even though in 2016, some people were enamored by the idea of saying, oh, he's never been involved in politics, he has no skill in politics, but he was a CEO, that makes him what? A bit able to
But he was
govern the
not a
United States.
normal CEO. He was not a CEO of, let's say, General Electric, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, he basically was the CEO of a family-held corporation.
Yeah.
But even if he had been, let's say, the CEO of a publicly traded corporation like that, the skill sets that you need to be president are very different than the skill sets that you need to be a CEO. Remember, at the end of the day, in a corporation, especially a family-held corporation, Trump can sit in his seat and say, to ape his line from his show, you're fired, you're hired, do X, do Y.
Yeah.
As president, you can't do that. There's this wonderful book called Presidential Character by Richard Neustadt. All right. And what Neustadt argues, the power of the presidency is about the power to persuade. It's about recognizing that there's this nasty thing called the Constitution, checks and balances, separation of powers. Other people who are elected, they have their own constituents. They get to do what they want. There's this famous scene in Richard Neustadt's book at the beginning where in 1952, they asked Harry Truman, can you give Dwight Eisenhower any advice on becoming president? And remember, Dwight Eisenhower, five-star general, head of the Allied Command.
Yeah, yeah.
And Truman says, poor Ike, he's going to start ordering people around, and no one's going to listen to him. He's going to think
Oh
he's
my
going to
God.
think
That is
he's
so
going to think it's like the
discerning.
military, and
Yeah.
nobody will pay attention to him. And what I'm getting at here is going into it. Trump, on one level, didn't have the skill sets to deal with the rough and tumble of politics. He was used to basically barking out commands in his own company. Or remember, was it 15 years or 16 years he had The Apprentice? He was
Yeah.
just barking out the phrase, you're fired, or something like that. And so what I'm getting at here is that he was never in a situation where he really had to um, deal with controversy.